もう懲りたか。ガゼス様への献上品を取り返そうなんてバカなことは考えないことだ。
それだけは渡せないのよ。
お嬢ちゃん一人で頑張ってもダメだぜ。今度は食い後攻撃だ。死ねー。待て。ファルコンサムナガンモード。飛び道具とは卑怯なり。だったらアローモード。それも飛び道具だろうよ。違う。はあ。
In my Fire Emblem Engage No Emblems playthrough, I found what is probably the best Etie build. Wind God Warrior Etie provides a lot of utility and plays both to Etie's strengths and weaknesses to create a unit that's super cheap to build but ridiculously effective. There are 3 necessary components to this build: Wind God, the Warrior class, and Etie. Let's start by going over each individual component, and also, while this was done in a No Emblems playthrough, I will be treating this build in the context of a regular playthrough with emblems. Wind God is a skill granted by the S-rank Claude Bond Ring. The Bond Ring itself grants +2 Dex, +1 Speed, and +1 Luck. Not particularly amazing, but +2 Dex is pretty good. The real bonus, though, is the Wind God ability. This incredibly game-breaking ability functions as follows. If unit's HP equals 100%, gain +1 range with bows. Yep, that's it, just one more range. Normally, bows have 2 range. This allows them to attack most melee units without being countered. 3 damage without fear of getting hit back is fantastic. In Engage, the longbow is a weapon that is a little weaker than normal bows, but has the added benefit of having 3 range. The longbow can attack other 2 range units without being countered. Wind God makes it so that any bow can act as a longbow, and the longbow now has 4 range. This means that you can outrange a vast majority of the enemies in the game with normal bows, and most of the rest of the game with a longbow. But there's more to it than just outranging enemies. Positioning in Fire Emblem is critical to avoiding attacks and staying alive. That +1 range means you can keep your frail archers a little further away from the front lines. And with Engage having max 6 movement on enemies, that +1 range can really make a difference for being able to attack without leaving yourself vulnerable. You can combine this with the inheritable canter skill to allow your archers to attack from 3 to 4 range, then move an additional 2 to 3 spaces away from your foes. This can allow you to walk in, snipe an enemy, and then move back out of their range. In enemy phase, you can use a stronger, easier to double with weapon to counter longbows or thunder tomes, potentially picking up a kill that you wouldn't get otherwise. And lastly, Wind God is actually very easy to acquire. Thanks to how the game is programmed, you can manipulate the RNG of the bond ring system, allowing you to get any S-rank bond ring with 1,000 bond points or less with maybe a few hours of your time and patience. Here's the short version of how to do it. Enter a main chapter or paralogue, leave, save, roll for 10 bond rings. If you get the bond ring you want, good. If not, reset. There's more that you can do with this, but for the sake of brevity, I'll leave it at that. So how can we best utilize this ability? You could go the expected route and use the Sniper class, which has an ability that increases crit rate by 10 when fighting a unit that cannot counter. This synergizes really well with a Killer Bow and Wind God. But we can do even better. The Warrior class is a backup unit that uses axes and bows. What it lacks in crit potential, it makes up for in utility. Backup units will do a chain attack against any enemy in range when an ally attacks them, dealing damage equal to 10% of the target's max health. With +1 range longbow, the area that you can initiate chain attacks with increases exponentially. You can pretty much cover every enemy in a huge area. If you want, you can slot dual assist on your Wind God Warrior, which adds your movement to your chain attack range, with the drawback of that added range having only a % chance to activate. In other words, your Wind God Warrior has a potentially huge range to assist all of your allies in combat. Lastly, the Warrior skill, Merciless, increases your damage by 50% against broken enemies. You can combine this with the aforementioned range bonuses and a Fracture Staff to inflict break on a tricky opponent from range, moving your Wind God Warrior in and then taking them out in one fell swoop, or you can use the class's access to A-rank axes and use a Brave Axe to deal massive amounts of damage in a pinch. So, why Etie of all units? There are really only 3 stats that you need for this build. The strength to hit hard, speed to not get doubled, and sometimes double 3 range foes, and dex to make sure you land your shots. This coincides with some of Etie's better stats. She has the second highest base strength growth in the game at 40%, Her speed growth is solid at 35, and her dex growth is okay at 25. As a warrior, these increase to 60%, 45%, and 40% respectively. For weapons, Etie is also one of the few units in the game that has an innate bow proficiency. The warrior class normally only has access to C rank bows, but with her innate proficiency, she gets B rank in the class. Now, this only unlocks one bow that she can use that normal warriors cannot, the silver bow. A silver bow has 3 more might and weight over a steel bow, which is not a huge upgrade, but Etie is not super fast, so she can use the added damage to hit harder. So your basic game plan is to use a silver bow for damage, a steel bow for doubling when it's possible, and a longbow for added range, and that's really all you need.
The reason to use Etie over any other unit is quite simple. Other units are far more effective with resources and emblems. This Etie build uses what strengths she does have to great effect, ignores her weaknesses, and is very resource efficient. We can get the most out of Etie as a combat support, and pour the rest of our resources into our other damage carries. Other units that can use this build well include Vagato and Amber. That concludes the Wind God Etie build. Now, this build was run in version 1.2 of the game, so it predates the well and some of the DLC bracelets. Does it still stack up? Sorta. The well fixes a lot of the SP problems the game used to have, so the need for a hyper-resource efficient build is kind of unnecessary. Also, the addition of the rest of the emblem bracelets means that you can get those and have pretty much every unit deployed with an emblem for most maps, making the need for a unit with a bond ring kind of unnecessary. If you don't have the DLC though, or are doing a no emblems run like I was, this build is still quite good and you can run it on multiple units for even greater effect. The well does introduce some nice bonuses though, even for this build. Since it's easier to give SP to units, you can justify giving Etie Draconic Hex for fairly cheap, allowing her to debuff her target before the rest of your party piles on the damage. This Wind God Etie build got hurt a little bit by the DLC in the well, but is overall still quite usable.